So to kick things off, we do have a couple slides for you so we can set the base knowledge for forage sorghum. And I think for the most part, Jeff's going to do that for us.
So Mary and I have met each other before, and we are such professionals we did not have to practice. How's that sound? No, we know so much wait, do you have you have a PhD. I only went as far as an MS because I figured just a little bit more than a BS was probably...
Yeah, so I went for 2 PhDs just to make it even worse, so it's really piled higher and deeper, just so you know.
I'm not sure how she's going to help at this point, but...
You lose all your common sense the more education you get, right? Okay.
If I was not that sarcastic person, you'd wonder if I felt okay today. All right, so here we are. Doing what we love to do. So folks, get your mind wrapped around summer annual forages. We are at a sorghum symposium today. How many people out here realize that you can do more with sorghum other than baking bread and having pudding and some of these other fun things? So it's not just a grain crop. How many people know that? Okay, we should have lots of good participation then.
That's right. Isn't that the most beautiful thing you've ever saw? All right.
What's the cheapest way to harvest sorghum? Yeah, open a gate. Right, open the gate. All right. So, set the rules here. It's amazing for me as I travel the United States and get to talk to people how much of this they really have not been exposed to. It's just a new thing. Maybe we're in the generation today where, grandpa's talked about having sorghum back in the day, or I'm going to call myself middle-aged at this point. I remember the pick acre days where we had some sorghum in spots, right? And I saw some heads shaking back there. That's cool. But we've lost, I think, a grip on why people used to plant sorghum. And then for some reason, culturally, we kind of got away from it. The other acres, the other grain complex, I'm going to say, kind of took some of that away from us. But today, as we look at the economics of why would we plant sorghum as a forage crop? Well, many of us know that simply sorghum in general, including the grains, is that we have less input costs. When we look at water, if you're in an irrigation situation and you need to be watering, it's no new news that we're regulated on how much we can pump. We have water fights over who owns what water. Wells are going dry in different places. So first of all, water use efficiency to me is one of the biggest major tools, not just in an irrigated situation, but some of these dryland acres, especially as we get into, how many people are running cows generally on really nice flat bottom ground that you can raise 250 bushel corn on, right? No, it's usually yeah. Nobody raised their hand that they do that. It's usually that crappy ground, eroded clay knobs, side hills, rocky places. Well, there's not a lot of water available in some of those environments either. So water use efficiency, the seed cost. We've got a slide coming up here. The input cost for this thing is fantastic. Many people would argue, and we get this question a lot in my side too, well, what's it really worth? If I'm going to make sorghum silage, how do I value this thing? What's it worth? Well, depending on the parameters in your profile, we can raise some sorghum that's very comparable in energy. So very digestible fiber to give us that big pile of fiber. And depending on what we're using, we can get some very good energy out there. And then, again, when we talk about yields and we talk about water use efficiency and how stress tolerant this crop is, I depending on the crowd I'm in, I'm like, okay, if you can't consistently raise 125 or 150 bushel corn, which that means that's different for every region we go to, you should probably be raising sorghum for a feed source simply because, as this says, on some acres, sorghum will yield more. Certain weather conditions and patterns, you will yield more. You might have something to harvest, period, versus the corn that's next to it if you're doing a comparison. So all of these things feed into why we want to talk about sorghum for feed. So Mary, you and I looked at this slide a few minutes ago, and what are a few things that jump out at you as you look at what it costs to raise an acre of corn versus an acre of sorghum feed?
Well, I think there's a few things that jump out. The major one, right? What's the major difference in cost? It's seed cost.
Seed cost is number one.
Is number one. Then we get a little bit into some reduction in fertility and insect control,
Yeah.
right? That would probably be the other ones. And then you have disease control.
So we've got a lot of people doing fungicides these days, and we really haven't broke into fungicide on sorghum.
Yeah, basically, you're talking lower input, right? That's key difference here in costs is input.
So quick math, and when I put this together, I'm pretty sure some of you can buy corn for less than $385 per bag, depending on what traits package you have in it. And I actually put $180 for a bag of forage sorghum in there. I pushed that envelope up there, excluding any herbicide tolerant trait. I could add that now. This I shouldn't say this. This dates my slide just a touch. But $180 would get you fully treated best of the best forage sorghum with Concept, Cruiser, all the goodies. So,
and that's what you'd recommend, isn't it?
well, we'd recommend that every day. Yes.
He's wearing his seed outfit, so I got to give him a little hard time.
Okay, so yeah, I'm a distribution person. Agronomist first. That's why I have to wear the boots. Anybody have any thoughts or comments just before we leave that slide? Anything that pops out, want to discuss, curious? How does that make sense? Very good. Okay, yes. Please.
Weed control. Why more forage versus corn?
Okay, the weed control piece in here. I've got 35 versus $40. Silly, wild-ass guess. I would say part of it would be, what did you say? Well, part of it, yeah, you probably get planted a little later. It's warmer. You're going to get more weed emergence and competition with it right away before you get that canopy. So getting that, and I'm going to say, as Dr. Bean said earlier, getting your pre-emerge down there and maybe the residual, it's going to add just a little bit of bump in that. And I think you can play with those numbers a lot, but to come up with a $250 to $280 difference in input costs, let's cut that thing in half and call it $140. I'll still take that.
Yeah, you can definitely play with those numbers, but I've seen some similar numbers from Kansas State,
Yeah.
Texas A&M budgets that would show at least that much difference.
So Dr. Bean's saying that he's seeing university data on budgets that would show at least that much difference.
The weed control, that one does surprise me. To be honest, I would think the corn is more, these budgets I see are more, simply because the corn grower can afford more money to spend on herbicides.
And I'm gonna take a step back. Anybody that gives Dr. Bean, when you give presentations, do you recreate new slides every time you go out, or do they kind of get shuffled from? Oh yeah, week to week. I'm going to say I'm guilty. This is year to year. When I did this slide, folks, I'm going to be quite honest. It probably was before we had so much glyphosate tolerance that's hurt us all, and this was probably based on ammonium sulfate and a quarter Roundup. Does that make a little more sense? So let me backtrack a little bit. Yeah, that's probably where that comes from. Otherwise, I think we could see bigger differences in there. And then today, if we take herbicide-tolerant forages and grain sorghum and plug that royalty fee in there, plus the use of some of these newer chemistries, we could eat that thing up really fast, especially if you did a pre-emerge plus the post-emerge, we'd double that.
Depending on where you're at, that's very important. That 18 inches of forward sorghum, a lot of irrigation.
So I gave the forage sorghum a little extra water. Most of our research sites are irrigated for corn, and sorghum just happens to ride along. But anyway, yeah, just some numbers for you to, okay, all else aside, there's a big gap. That's the point, right? Big gap between the two. Thanks for the questions. Now, Mary and I got kind of a chuckle out of this because we get those phone calls where people will call us and say, yep, we got to talk to you for a minute. We need to plant some cane this year. We're going to plant some feed. Guys, what does that mean? It's like saying, hey, I need to buy a new truck. Well, what are you going to use it for? Do you want a half ton? Do you want a Colorado, a half ton, a 3/4 ton, a 1 ton, a 550? You get where I'm going with that? So forage sorghum, generally to us, when we get those calls, is a very large volume single cut material. Okay? It's intended to be cut once. Hopefully you can get it dry enough to cut it standing and not have to swath and wilt before you run through the chopper, but it's a large volume crop chopped. Just as some general reference today. Now, the sorghum Sudan grasses. I get it when a guy calls and says, I need some hay grazer. But again, when they call and say, hey, I need some feed this year, I got to dig a little deeper and ask some questions. What's your intended purpose? How are you going to harvest it? What are your needs? All those kind of things. So, how are these more valuable? Sorghum Sudan grasses have faster regrowth. They're generally built that way. They tiller more. We have different, again, trait packages and characteristics in these, and we probably missed it in the last slide, but brachytic traits, BMR traits, you get different male sterile, sugarcane aphid tolerant, all that kind of stuff. But the biggest difference between the first two categories is multi-cuttings, faster regrowth, and I use the word cuttings interchangeably. I should say multiple harvests, because we can rotationally graze livestock or take a grazing, take a cutting first, graze later. All these kind of options can happen.
So I want to point something out here
perfect.
because so I am one of those people who goes back and looks at the data, right? That's probably part of that PhD. But I go back and look in the data, and the data said Sudan grass does better with regrowth than sorghum Sudan grass. And so I started grazing Sudan grass in my rotational grazing system, do a very intensive rotation graze. And I thought, man, this is bee's knees. I mean, we get 3 AUMs an acre. I can carry a cow on an acre for the season kind of thing. It's wonderful stuff. So I thought I'd figured it all out. And then last year, I actually planted some sorghum Sudan. Normally, I only plant it for hay or silage. But I planted it and we did rotational grazing, and now I got to go back and say, maybe we've made some genetic improvements and I should be thinking more about sorghum Sudan for rotational grazing. So I may be changing my mind. Now I need to do some head-to-heads. Maybe he'll help me do that. But I would say sorghum Sudan also has a place in rotational grazing, and I was super impressed with some of the sorghum Sudan that we did some very intensive grazing on last year. It makes them feed.
So you'll see 3 different photos on here at different maturity stages, if you will look at it that way. The plant to the left, so I like picking on people. I'm a little bit on the edge of colorful at times. When you go to the Ed's Feed and Seed and say, hey, Joe, I really don't care. I just need something that's going to turn green and make a turd. Well, what do you have? They might sell you this stuff here on the right that would look similar to that. And what I mean by that is there's a certain line of sorghum Sudan grass. This is very common. There's some common breeding back there that's very cheap. The maturity piece that I want to point out here is that they might put a head on at 55 days. So you plant it June 1st, you get the full month of June, you're into July. It's vegetational growth is done. But you might have a grower that leaves it from June till September and says, oh man, we just got to leave it out there because we need as much tonnage as we can get. Well, at that point, all you've done is, I'm going to say this loosely, added a scraggly seed head, a grassy, scraggly seed head. Your forage quality has dropped like a rock. Crude protein's gone. And you go, man, we got some bales, but we have to supplement a lot. Okay. Second scenario, this one might head at 65 or 70 days. So you can utilize a little bit more of that growing season if you're not going to cut it, graze it, or do something more to it in season to have more grazing or harvest sequences. The one on the end is what we would consider what today's industry calls photoperiod sensitive. And we have another slide about that here in a minute, but you can see on the same day during the growing season, which one's going to have the most biomass produced? The one that doesn't slow down to put a head on right away, right? So if you've got a person that wants to really get after it, planting something that's going to be done in 55 days, unless you cut it, graze it, harvest it, and get it to regrow, as Mary said before, you're kind of killing the season. So I wanted to put that up here that there are different, I'm going to call them different maturity levels, if you will, in the sorghum world from a forage standpoint that in your hybrid selection or variety selection from that standpoint, knowing those differences helps you make a better decision on what to purchase.
I'll just make another comment and then we'll take your question. But from a quality perspective, that's also important to understand that maturity drives quality. I get a lot of people who say exactly that. Oh, I've planted sorghum Sudan's low quality. Sorghum's low quality. Well, when did you harvest it, right? So stage really makes a huge difference. If you are in the earlier stages, I mean, I can show them numbers where you're getting the energy content, like you said, corn silage level of something that is just vegetative plant, like leaf and stem, just that short green material is so high energy and high protein like alfalfa quality. So it's all about management and desire, like what are you trying to achieve, rather than thinking that, okay, this is how it always is. Am I targeting yield? Am I targeting quality? Am I doing recut? What am I doing? What do you want? That's how you select. Yes, ma'am, you had a question.
Yeah, can you talk more about the photoperiod sensitive as far as quality, nutrition, protein? Does it just stay at that same quality level? Is it a lesser quality because of this longer term?
I'm going to take that.
You can go for it.
Okay, so I'm guessing.
I'll butt in if I want
I'm
to.
guessing most of you heard that question, so since you're all that close right here. But how does the quality aspect or the protein change as the photoperiod goes? So again, to back up, do I have photoperiod next? Okay, I'm just going to leave it on this slide for a second. This slide represents 30 days worth of regrowth in the front and about 80 days worth of original growth in the back. So I came in at about, 45, 50 days, took a cutting off, and then we see some regrowth in the back is what it was doing. Now, how do I want to say this? It maintains quality longer because we're not setting that plant up to go reproductive. So it's still going to decline day after day, but instead of the curve being like this, it might flatten it out a little bit because we're not trying to go vegetative. That's the numbers we see. Now the crude protein, again, it's going to slightly flatten out just a little bit, not at the same pace, because it seems like once that thing shoots a flag leaf and starts putting a grain head out, the crude protein, you'll go from 14, 15, 16% and drop to 8% when that head's developed. Now you've got a little starch content up there. Hard to digest starch content, I might think, but to that level, yes, it maintains quality longer through the season than letting it just go to head and stand there and get really mature and lose quality. That particular, this is not a sales presentation, although that particular photo right there is BMR, photoperiod sensitive, male sterile, and sugarcane aphid tolerant. Now, there's one more variety that has one more, it's got 2 PhDs. It also has a brachytic trait in it, or a dwarf trait. So there's a lot of acronyms on some of these varieties today. Now, the cool thing about it is, yes, when you go to this level where it's BMR, reduced lignin content, higher fiber digestibility, photoperiod sensitive, so it's going to just give you that full season growth if you need it. Male sterile, what does that do for us? Male sterility basically says that once it gets less than 12 hours and 20 minutes of daylight in mid-September, if you look at the almanac, it'll give you what day that is, probably about the 15th to 18th of September here. Now it will trigger that head, but if there's no active pollen in the area, it won't pollinate itself. And I'm probably saying this too simply, but it's a male sterile, so it won't produce seed. That helps store more of that sugar in the plant versus trying to make the starch carbohydrate that goes in the seed head. So it's kind of an amazing combination of pieces, especially if you don't know. Like, how many people know what the weather's going to do June 1st or next week when you go to order that seed? And you go, well, I want the most flexibility I can get. I think these are so fantastic because, I mean, we're just sitting here talking about taking it out full season, 100 days. I have some, in some plots where we're in different parts of the country. I had Haven, Kansas, down by Wichita last year, 120 days worth of growth. And it did get 12 feet tall, but if you're going to try to chop as much fiber, biomass as you can, that's a fantastic crop because it never slowed down to put a head on. It just continued to put new leaves out the top every week, every day. So they're kind of fun to play with.
Yeah, I guess I'd make a comment, like the easy way I think about the photoperiod sensitive and the male sterile is you're taking the energy and some of the nitrogen that you would be putting into the grain and you're keeping it in the plant. And from a nutrition standpoint, especially like with the sorghum sedans, I've done a little bit of work just playing around with a bit of digestibility of the seed. And if you're not going to do any kind of processing, there's a lot of it that just goes through the animal. So I want to keep it in something that the animal can take and use. And so that's a huge advantage. And when you do go out full season, now I do a lot more grazing than I do silage production. We do some. But the photoperiod sensitive at the end of the season will keep a lot more sugar in that stem. And I've seen cattle actually preferentially select stem because it had so much sugar in it, even over the leaf, which was, to me, something that was mind-blowing because I'm like, leaf is always better than stem, right? Leaf is always better than stem. So I'm telling you all the things that I learned that where the dogma is wrong, or at least my dogma is wrong. I'm wrong a lot, but that's okay. I learn, and that's how you learn, by observing. And so I took some measurements trying to figure out why they were eating this stem and not eating this leaf, and it turns out the digestibility and the energy was so much higher. Made sense. It was kind of cool.
When I was doing some thinking about this earlier too, and we start talking about energy, now tell me if you guys can help school me. There's probably a nutritionist in here somewhere. But if we take the carbohydrates that plant is producing, and then all of a sudden we convert that free energy into grain and go from protein or sugars to starch. Then once that livestock consumes it, they have to take that starch and convert it back to a carbohydrate or a simple sugar anyway, right?
Well, yeah, they break down.
Break it down.
Okay, so you're talking about the microbe, right?
The microbes,
breaking down the starch back to glucose,
yeah.
right?
So if we can keep it in a glucose or a sugar state, would it be more efficient anyway?
Oh.
Sorry, we're having a discussion in front of you.
I don't know that it would be more efficient. I actually think our bigger challenge, frankly, is just getting to the starch.
Okay, fair enough. So we need to get that kernel cracked. We need a shear processor to get that.
Yeah, well,
that berry chopped.
Yeah, try that with the sorghum sedan seed.
That's right.
It's even smaller.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I've always heard that if you're going to bale the cane, that you want to get it swapped down just before the head comes out of the booth, because your cane will have a better quality to it. Because what little bit of grain that would produce, that grain isn't really going to help your cattle anyway. Is that true?
Do you want to answer that question?
I'm just wondering how many times you've sat in the crowd with me before. That sounds like something I would have said.
Well, that's what I'm over 60 years old, and I've heard that for the last 40 years.
I would agree with that 100%. And I'm even the silly guy, Dr. Bean, down in anywhere. I struggle sometimes with our water waste to try to make grain on even forage sorghums that we're going to chop in not even sorghum sedan grass, but even crops that are, because I'm looking at that trade-off. Again, if I've got even a single cut forage sorghum, once that flag leaf comes out, the protein drops down. Again, you're going to go from 12 to 8. Sometimes guys look at the protein in their silage and go, it's 7. The starch is a little higher, but if it's not processed, we don't get much of that starch value. So I'm like, guys, to take the fiber digestibility and the crude protein, which you're going to have to add back anyway, because everybody wants to balance for protein. So it's maybe some distiller's grain or soybean meal or canola meal, something. Let's just take a little higher quality and a little less tonnage. Get that thing out of the field. not water it that last go around or whatever it might be. So I even am the goofy guy. The custom choppers don't like me very well because they say, swath it, wilt it for 2 days, and pick it up with the hay head. And the chopper guy goes, la, 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 la. No, we want to chop it standing. So, but to cut hay, I would say I'm in that boat all day long. You're going to get better quality, better digestibility, because you're going to go from Snickers bars to celery in about 3 weeks, in my mind. So,
I'll just add a comment to that, because I think if you're trying to look for a balance between yield and quality, I think that's a reasonable time frame. But it is always it depends, and my it depends really is, do you go earlier? And so it depends on what you're trying to do, right? Like if I want to harvest something that's really high quality to target an animal who has really high needs, especially protein or energy, I might even go earlier. You're giving up yield, at least on that cut, and you have to acknowledge that. So but sometimes that might make sense. But if you're kind of looking for that optimal time of just having, I want as much yield as I can, but I don't want to end up with celery, as you were talked about, I think that's a good time frame before you get the seed head out. It's a good balancing point, but there are reasons, I guess I will say, there are reasons why I might go even earlier than that. And some varieties are better attuned to even going earlier and doing a double cut than others would be. But yeah, so as a nutritionist, I would say it depends, because it depends on who I'm trying to feed. If I'm trying to feed cows, that's a great time. Steve.
So the main reason, and I'm not a forage guy necessarily, but understanding the moisture content of you're trying to make silage, I mean, that was my understanding. All the reason we went to producing grain on sorghum was so we got a moisture content that would keep us silage. And you're saying swath it down, which 12, 14 stuff with that much tons, that's a challenge to begin with. And then, but is that the only way you've got to get, if you want to harvest it early to get the moisture where it needs to be, is to swath it and wilt it? Or is there some varieties that are better at that, or we just have to let it produce grain to get the moisture we got to have for silage?
So I would say yes. Your point is very well taken. That most of the time in most worlds, yeah, so there's different maturities in forage sorghum. Probably the shortest maturity I know that's very effective at all is going to be like an 85 day to maturity. So that's emergence to soft dough. And at soft dough, we always talk about somewhere about 70% whole plant moisture, which is fantastic, right? Now, if you're on an irrigated situation, and we talk about, you start getting that head to emerge, you might think about cutting the water off so that it utilizes the moisture around it, makes a seed head, and everything can dry. As I push through this part of the country and go farther north, how many times you get a nice little August shower? Sorghum has a tendency to pick up, it seems to me like you're 70% moisture on Monday and it rains. Wednesday, you're 75% and it holds on for dear life. Corn will pick up a half a point and shuck it in 3 hours. Sorghum will pick up 4% and hold it for a month. So that's a problem, and probably one of the things that we talked about just a little bit ago that maybe hinders us from using more sorghum on acres is dry down for harvest. And so for the scientists earlier, or the people on the sorghum boards that are looking for ideas, one thing that we're really trying to find would be, again, a little bit of cold tolerance to plant, maybe just a few days earlier to get more in line with some of the other crop. Shorter maturities that will produce just a touch better. And then there's this whole dry down thing, and I don't want to get too far the cart ahead of the horse, but I have visited a replicated research breeding trial where the breeder says, if you think we have dry stock on the market today, come look at this. So we're trying to work on some genetics today in the background that will inherently be drier as it's green and mature, where we can harvest it standing. And I'm saying maybe 10% or more difference in moisture standing versus a regular juicy today. So that's exciting to me. And if we can get just a touch earlier so we can get it out of the field and have a dry stock, that would be fun.
I was going to say, I'm going to change your priorities and put moving that moisture management up on the list of priorities, because that is the number one problem that I have with clientele, whether it be from silage or trying to make hay out of sorghum sudan. Either one, getting the moisture where you want it is usually their biggest issue. And as you mentioned, swathing it and letting it sit to dry, even with the technologies that we do have to crimp and all of those things, it is very difficult. It's really easy to get wrong and really hard to get right. So anything we can do to manage that moisture from a breeding perspective would be amazing. But yeah, I think, we did last year, I cut some for silage, and of course, rain came into the forecast, right? You know how that goes. And then the debate was, it's not dry enough yet. Do we go for it before it rains, or do we let it get rained on and then wait till it gets to the right moisture? Right? People have that challenge all the time, right? That is the struggle. And so it is something to think about. By the way, we went for it. We mixed in some dry forage, not the best thing in the world, right? But that's what we did. I will tell you that the regrowth on it was so amazing, though, that I didn't feel very sad at all. I think I got a whole nother second crop is the way I looked at it, because it was 6 feet tall again by the end of the season, and we swathed it and grazed it. It was amazing. So I didn't have the best feed in the end of the silage, but I got the feedlot some feed, and then I got some grazing, so it was okay.
And a couple of suggestions, and you guys can all add in too if you have some experience, but if you get into that situation where you say, look, we've got to go. Not many people own their own choppers if you're not a bigger dairy or fig yard. So you're at the mercy of the custom chopper. Hey, Joe, I'm going to be there on Monday or Wednesday, let's just say. We're coming through your neighborhood on Wednesday. Get the pile ready. Well, the crop's not ready yet. Well, I'm either going to get it on Wednesday or you'll be at the end of the tour when I get back, which is November, right? Because they got all kinds of stuff going on. So a few things that we've had guys do is increase the chop length just a little bit so you have less pieces. And I'm going to say that because if it's too wet and you're at your normal corn 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, depending on which person you're working with, you're going to make goulash in the truck. If you can increase the chop length, make sure the kernel processor is opened all the way open or taken out, then you just have less, I'm going to say you have less cell membrane disruption and less moisture that's just going to flow out the back of the truck and have problems with. So there's a couple little things that we ask guys to do, but it's a tough challenge. And then you get the guy that says, well, I'm just going to wait till it freezes. We'll let that thing start to dry down. Well, the thing they underestimate is that they get that frost and the leaves look like they're turning brown and they kind of dry up and they start chopping and it's still 74% moisture because that stem holds so much water. And they're like, oh gosh, and I left it wait a little longer and now it's froze and the integrity of that plant's not there anymore. So 30% of it's fallen down and I'm never planting sorghum again. So it's about managing their expectations up front and helping people have a successful. I think we would have twice as many forage sorghum acres as if we didn't have a harvest challenge in the north. In the south, it's a little easier to manage.
Totally agree. It is the biggest challenge. So moisture management, for those people who do the breeding, we want help.
So I did put this, the brachytic dwarf photo up here. For those of you that don't understand what those things mean, we basically are shortening the internode space between leaves. And for a livestock nutrition person looking at digestibility and total palatability, I always ask the question to the crowd, what's the most undigestible portion of the plant? And other than this
should be the stem.
Yeah, other than this photo period sugar comment she made earlier. But the stem, the stalk, is usually the most undigestible portion. So we shorten those internode spaces. We have higher leaf to stem ratio, better digestibility numbers when we run calibrated data. And also when we can reduce some of those lodging potentials on a sorghum, it helps tremendously. And I think one of the big things that we I work very, very hard with people to manage the planting populations of forage sorghum so we don't overplant. I'm one of those guys that recommends about 5 pounds to the acre. Well, at 15,000 seeds per pound, you're talking 75,000 plant population, right? And a lot of us plant it in a 30-inch row with our corn planter and meters and discs. And I've had people look at me and say, oh, we've planted 8 or 10 pounds our entire life. How many times did it lodge and fall down? I don't think we really gain a whole lot of tonnage, so I'm going to give you that agronomic piece right now. I would really challenge plant populations because there are certain people that maybe like to sell seed more than I do. I'd like to be right. They like to sell. I'm a 5-pound guy or somewhere in that neighborhood where we're not getting, because think about that. If you have 10 pounds, it's 150,000 plants in a 30-inch row per acre, and you planted your corn at, what, 30 to 40? What's 150,000 look like in a 30-inch row? You couldn't run rabbits through there. So I challenge people on population because that causes a lot of bad late season standability issues and lodging, and then they have a bad taste and they just don't want to deal with that. So being proactive and having people have good experiences is usually something that we strive for. And although that bag of seed stretches twice as far, I'd rather have a guy happy and wanting to plant more sorghum, Tyler, and keeping this thing going.
I have 2 comments. One would be, just to be clear, I don't think that the photoperiod sensitive or the marrow-sterile, it always causes that phenomenon of the sugar. That's at the end of the season. So I want to be clear that during the growing season, that's not going to be what you see. So it still holds true even for those in terms of this idea of the leaf being the better material. This is just a kind of a interesting thing at the end of the season after the frosts that you will see, which was kind of intriguing to me. And then the other one, he was talking about planting population. And a few years ago, there was a calibration mistake. Those never happen with seeding. And we ended up seeding a field at twice the rate for sorghum Sudan grass. We did half of it, and they ran out of seed. And they called me and they said, we ran out of seed. And I said, how did you run out of seed? We have the calibration right. I'm like, no way you did. Anyways, so the other half got planted at the recommended seeding rate. And so it was kind of fun because we looked at the difference in yield. There was maybe 10% difference in yield. We got about 10% more with twice the seed. No differences in quality. So it was kind of just an interesting thing. I could have spent a lot more money on seed and get very little benefit.
So I'm glad you said that, because the next slide is a BMR slide. And we talk about fiber digestibility, right? And we're just talking about populations a little bit. That's a perfect segue. So folks, and maybe none of you in here are guilty of this, but as a technical support person that gets lots of questions, I will say, hey, or example goes like this. I showed you that earlier picture where a guy will call into the feed and seed shed and, hey, give me the cheapest thing you got. You know, some of these guys, and we're all guilty, we want to be able to stretch that penny far enough to wire this building, right? Okay, well, give me the cheapest thing you got. Well, usually the cheapest thing you have is an old genetics, conventional sorghum Sudan grass that's going to get 8 foot tall, put a head on in 55 days, and feed like a piece of cardboard just shortly after that. Okay. Now, I'll say, well, I've got this awesome brachytic, higher leaf to stem ratio, BMR, higher digestibility with this all tied together. So now I've got this superfood, right? I'm going to call it superfood. It's BMR and it's brachytic. Lots of leaves, highly digestible. And they go, well, how much does that cost? Well, it's about twice as much per bag. And they go, oh, well, that'll never work. You just went from $40 to $80. That math doesn't work. And I said, well, okay, but what's your planting rate on that value material that you just wanted to purchase? Oh, you know, we plant 50, 75. I had a guy tell me one day he planted 150 pounds, Mr. Bean, in Texas. 150 pounds. I said, oh, yeah, whew, that's a lot. Well, yeah, you know, we got to have those fine stems so it's palatable and the cows will eat it. Okay, so you spent $120 an acre, and I'm going to tell you to take an $80 bag of seed and plant 25 pounds, have higher digestibility, better palatability. Oh, and by the way, this guy lived in like kind of those fancy gated, or he had a bunch of those longhorn cows in the fancy gated communities where they just wanted to have the big show pieces. I said, by the way, if it's higher digestibility and more efficient, there'd be less manure to haul out and less waste from those bales that are in the feeder. He's like, oh, think about that. But I can't tell you how many discussions I have with people that want the cheapest bag of seed they can find and plant 50 pounds, spend $40 an acre, when I'm going to tell them to buy a better bag of seed,
And plant less.
plant it at 25 pounds and have $40 an acre, have probably a better rate of gain, less manure to haul, better condition on the livestock, and it's just, sometimes you just can't be clear enough that the math doesn't math very well. Okay? And we've all heard that 100 times in the last 6 months, right? The math isn't mathing right now. So keep that in mind. And some older Texas A&M data said that grazing stocker calves going from a conventional to a BMR would be 0.3 of a pound per head per day gain difference.
Okay, I'm going to
And that's old data.
I'm going to give you a hard time, though.
That's fine. Do it.
So some of that data showed that,
Darn it.
and you are right. However, the key difference was if they didn't let it get mature, they didn't see that advantage. If they let it get mature, they did.
That was
So-
not a piece that I got in my information. Thank you.
Yeah. So so I always tell people, I mean, okay, here's the thing. I talk about management of maturity, and I think that is the number one thing for me in terms of
Yes.
forage quality. BMR, the way I kind of look at it, is a little bit of an insurance, even in a grazing program. If it does get away from you, you'll be able to get more out of it. I don't use a lot of BMR in my grazing program, but I am a very intensive rotational grazing, like 3 or 4 days. However, the way I look at it is if I chose to go that route, I might get a little bit lower yield, not very much, but a little bit lower yield, but then I have this better quality product if it does get mature, and especially if I was going to stockpile it, for sure. But I just want to point out where the key difference is, it helps you in terms of when it gets lignin, you don't have as much of that cross-linking, and so they get more out of it. So the more mature it is, the more benefit you have, so to speak, to that BMR. That's kind of the way I look at it.
That's a perfect example. So it's like that curve again. The BMR is going to help it flatten out that curve on quality decline. It helps maintain quality longer as you get into more mature plants. I would agree that rotationally grazing or harvesting at a faster sequence to keep that more vegetative, and the smaller it is, the higher quality it is, right? So that's a pretty good thing. You can tell I'm a marketing person, right?
So we have about 5 minutes left of our discussion. Is there any other questions in the audience? I'm sure Tyler has plenty enough to fill us for the rest of the afternoon, but if there's any additional questions, I know Jeff and Mary absolutely want to attempt to get to all the ones that they can for you.
Question, please.
I saw online you had brought up prussic acid, and with new varieties there is a possibility that there is no prussic acid anymore.
So thank you for that question, because if you didn't bring it up, I was going to have to. So for everybody that's grazed sorghum sedan grasses or forage sorghums in general, I think the whole sorghum class would follow this. They produce this Durin compound that when you are under some extreme stress, sometimes even shorter immature plants, so the rapid growth and or this frost in the fall, we worry about prussic acid. And yes, today there are, as far as I'm aware, only 2 varieties available from one breeding company. We have a conventional and a BMR, sorghum by sedan grass, with the prussic acid-free designation today where they don't produce prussic acid, so you should be able to graze through any of those other periods. And as Dr. Mary shared with me earlier, she's like, ooh, maybe I could graze just a touch sooner on some of those plots too.
Yeah, so I actually planted both of those last year. One we did silage with, and then grazed the regrowth in the fall. and that was the stuff that got 6 foot tall again. And the other one we did an intensive rotational grazing with. And the coolest thing about it, honestly, was I didn't have to worry about our management as much, because I could, if the plants have some places, sometimes cattle don't graze evenly, darn them. And so I had some plants that were smaller. I didn't care, right? Didn't matter to me now. But the neatest thing was I used it as a way to manage kind of the slump that I sometimes get, especially with grazing, and my nitrogen management is not always the greatest in terms of getting it on when it needs it. And so sometimes I'll get growth that'll be slowed down, and now I'm not able to keep up with the cattle. So we stockpiled some, and we strip grazed the stockpiled stuff when the rest of the pasture was recovering. And it was amazing because I didn't have to worry about it. And then when the rest, some quarter of the other pasture was ready to go again, I'd just come off the stockpile, graze that. If I needed to go back, I didn't care if there was regrowth in the stuff that is strip grazed. And it actually allowed a lot more flexibility with management. So I'm super excited about the prussic acid free. Also, like last year, I pulled off because I thought, we were going to get the frost. And then I don't remember if any of you remember what last fall was like, but it was a fall that lasted forever. But I had pulled all my cattle off of a field that was not prussic acid free. And then the stuff got 4 foot tall, and I was so irritated, but I had to haul them, and I just kept going, it won't be worth it, it won't be worth it, and it would have been worth it to go back. So yes, prussic acid free, currently only 2 varieties, which is probably the downside, but it's an amazing potential. I'm super excited about it.
And anybody that heard that story a year ago when it was introduced in smaller quantities, there has been a change in the pricing structure per unit of seed is in your favor today. It actually was renegotiated backwards, so it's more palatable. I'm going to say palatable in this digestion discussion for the grower to want to buy that bag of seed as well. So that was a nice piece.
I just bought some more and having it shipped from California because that was the only place I could find it because I liked it that much. So I'm paying a little bit more for it, but I did the math and I was like, it's worth it. It's totally worth it.
Any final quick comments before we move on?
The only one, go back to your picture of the cows, because we love cows. I love cows. But the one thing, like, for me, the sorghum sedans it's hard to beat in an annual forage rotation. I've been doing it with rye and then sorghum sedan, and it's an amazing producer. It's a great little opportunity, and then you add that prussic acid free, and I can go longer into the season. It's pretty sweet.
Ditto. The grazing, I've joked about this. I carry this slide with me everywhere I go, and I say, in some crowds it makes more sense than others, but I say grazing our beef animals on sorghum sedan grass is the best kept secret we have in the industry. And we just don't do it enough because we're not comfortable with it. We don't know it. Maybe it happened years ago, but we haven't got back to it. Again, things have changed. The genetics are so much better. There's new stuff coming out all the time. We just really need to educate people around us that this is a viable crop to use for multiple reasons. And I think my last quick story goes like this. I get to travel quite a little. In every state, we have these areas, again, eroded clay knobs, really rough country. I have people, and I probably answered this question 15 times. It's not the most ideal, but how many people I have called me or given me the example where they've taken some corn and some sorghum in the same field, and they've planted a silage corn, but reduced the amount of seed they purchased and replaced it with a sorghum crop. It poses some challenges, but I've had guys tell me if I hadn't planted sorghum in that field, I wouldn't have had anything to chop. When you get on some of those sandy ground, eroded clay knobs, again, don't take this like it's holy grail or it's the best thing in the world, because there are challenges. The planting timing is wrong. Some of the herbicide challenges are tough to deal with. Harvest timing is different. We're going to end up taking the corn probably a little dry to get the wet sorghum to blend in and make a nice pile. But there's just a lot of these options that people, if we kind of think outside the box, ask some questions. You might get told no. You might have a mistake. But I think you really need to challenge yourself on what we can do with this crop because it's got a lot more use than what we're doing.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mary, for being with us today. I'm going to have Tracy give you speaker gifts as we transition here. Can we give them a round of applause, please?